What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Rao YouTube channel. We are back with another team preview. We are working our way through the top 25 teams in college football. We've been through number 25, 24, and now we're at 23, the Baylor Bears. They come in ranked number 23 overall after kind of a disappointing year last year. We're going to dive into what that year looked like, kind of the stats. But again, on these episodes, we're going to be diving into the full roster, depth chart, breakdown, player impacts, recruitment, schedule breakdown, going over it all. So if you're a college football fan, a Baylor fan, just in general excited for college football to come back, hit that like and subscribe button, wait for the video, and listen to us because we know what the hell we're talking about. So let's get into Baylor Bears, what we can expect from them on the other side of the intro. All right, so let's talk about the Baylor Bears. They finished 6-7 last year, so obviously disappointing, especially because they had a pretty good year the year before with Aranda there. Just didn't necessarily perform, the best they could. Points per game at 32.2. Opponents' points per game, that they were on that worst end of that, 26 points per game, 69th in the country there. Overall, just disappointing year. Like, they started off okay, 3-1, and they just went on that 4-game losing streak, losing to Kansas State, TCU, Texas, and they really could have beat TCU. There were some games in there they could have beat Texas. They had opportunities to look a little bit better on that record, just didn't pull through. And then, losing to Air Force is definitely not how you want to finish the year out, but they lost to Air Force and the Armed Forces Bowl, so that's definitely going to be there. But let's just take a look. Aranda is there now again, and he really targeted the portal. So we're going to talk about what he added in that range. But let's look at their offense. So Christian will walk us through the offense, what they got coming back, and some of those pieces.
Yeah, a lot of turnover on both sides of the ball, but the offense returning just one of their starting offensive linemen from last year definitely presents a new challenge for this offense. The good thing, Blake Shapen is back. I think, having consistency at the quarterback position is a good thing. He played, well enough to keep that job, though they did add Sawyer Robertson from the portal, which I think we'll talk about here in a second. Got a couple of wide receivers that are back, but Ketron Jackson Jr. is the big transfer in that I think can play a pretty big role for them. He's immediately going to walk into a starting position, and I think that he's going to help this offense. He's got a lot of athleticism. He should provide some type of playmaking ability, which is something I think last year's team definitely needed. And then the running back room, I think, is in good shape. They added Dominic Richardson. Richard Reese is back. Quaylen Jones is back. There's some guys to like in that running back room. So overall, I think, if they can find some consistency with that offensive line, I think we're looking at maybe an improved unit, but it all does depend on how that offensive line plays.
Yeah, I mean, like anything, and Blake Shapen, right? Like, I really think it has to be that. There's some, talk about Shapen maybe being, that. Is he on the hot seat? What does that look like? Kind of below average Sawyer Robinson coming into, and there's some talk out there like, hey, maybe Shapen's going to be on the hot seat a little bit in terms of like, hey, he's got to compete right away. And I think there's some noise of that. I think there's definitely some credibility there, and there's some losses. Really, just big two in this in terms of transfers out. Kyron Jones, Squirrel Williams. I like Kyron Jones. I've always kind of been a fan of his. He was a very good player at Texas in 6A ball out there. Like, he just never got in that field. Like, you saw him in the spring game last year going into it, and you thought maybe he could be that guy to take over. And I don't know what that says about Kyron. Obviously, he transferred to Virginia Tech and what that's going to look like. But if you can't beat out Blake Shapen, maybe this is a problem. Like, maybe that's a problem in terms of like, maybe they just didn't see something there. And he immediately entered that portal too. So he was ready to get out of there. Any takes on these guys, or do you want to, let's just dive into the recruiting class?
I hope Jones gets to start at Virginia Tech this year because I do want to see him play football. It's kind of interesting to me that, he didn't really get that opportunity and Shapen did. I would have to say that he was outplayed by Shapen, throughout their time together. So, but I want to see them play football. So that's all I have to say on these guys.
I do want to see Kyron. I think that he can be good, and maybe, this is a good opportunity for him to kind of get out of there, get out of Baylor and go somewhere else. As far as the recruits, so you can tell where they really prioritize that interior offensive line and tackle. Like, they really went after these guys on this side. There was a defensive heavy recruiting class. So overall, composite ranks, they ran around 34th in the country, but they definitely went defense. So we'll talk about that. But I guess their big piece was 4-star Isaiah Robinson, big kid, tackle, 6'7", 288. He's a big one. Like, you look at that, like, this kid's going to step in. And I think when you talked about their offensive line and what they're trying to accomplish, I think that's a big part of it. Like, I don't think he's going to get on the field right away, but Isaiah does give you that depth. Like, if something's going on with your tackle position, like Campbell Barrington, Elijah Ellis, those guys struggle, get injured. You have Robinson there, Sean Tompkins as well. I know they were high on Wes Tucker coming in. So some guys in that room that they definitely did target. So they did target an area of need. And I think Isaiah was a big piece. They were very happy just based on all the spring stuff that I talked about of getting Isaiah Robinson in school, and they're excited about him moving forward.
Yeah, and this is an offense that does like to rotate offensive linemen a little bit too. So I think we will see him, as that rotational piece. Most colleges like to do that, get their younger guys some reps, get them a series here and there. I will be interested to see if maybe he can hold the job after one of those series. We've seen that in the past, maybe not necessarily with the Baylor program, but there's certainly an opportunity for him to come in and be an impact freshman player.
Yeah, 100%. And this is really where they did the work, though, the transfer portal. They went out and really got some guys in this portal. Sawyer Robinson from Mississippi State is obviously the big one. And then you have Dominic Richardson. That was a big ad and a kind of a surprising move because they had Richard Reese, who performed really well last year, 981 yards and 14 touchdowns as a freshman. And people were like, hey, why they add Dominic there from Oklahoma State? But they did. And then I figure you're probably going to talk about him there. Ketron Jackson is another one. Jackson to me is a kid that, like, he could come in and be really, really good for them. Goes up 50-50 balls, can extend drives over the middle. And he gives them a needed element in that room, kind of that physical guy that can go up and get it. Like, I don't think Hal Presley is that kid. I think Jackson can do that. I think Jackson's going to give him that physical presence, kind of that guy that Shapen can kind of rely on, maybe target down the stretch. And so for me, I add him to our sleeper and our college football manifesto that we do for our Patreon. And I like this guy. I think his tape is there, and he could have a breakout. And then they added Jake Roberts and Campbell Barrington as well.
Yeah, among this group, I think the most notable was Sawyer Robertson, coming, and I know they lost Drones, but I think adding pieces to that quarterback room was certainly an indication that they're not necessarily 100% sold on Shapen being the starter. Richardson to me feels like the Squirrel Williams replacement. I think they like having a ton of backs there. They traditionally do. So, I think you're right about Jackson. Jake Roberts is one that I think he's penciled in as the starter already. So that's an interesting add as well, where I think maybe they can get some receiving production out of him, and that really open up their offense a little bit more. Cause like I said, they need some playmakers, and I think they added potentially 3 right here.
Yeah, 100%. And when we're talking about like their impact players, I'm still a big fan of Richard Reese. He had a lot of carries last year in a few games, in a few stretches down there. And I know he got a little bit tired. There was some games, I forget what game it was, where, they were expecting a breakout game, and then they just gave him like 6 carries because they were using him 30 attempts and stuff like that. So I do think that Dominic Richardson in there, if this team's going to be successful, they got to run on the ground. Like, they're going to have to use Richard Reese, Dominic Richardson, these guys, and really go heavy run offense, and then take their shots down there with Jackson and Presley, maybe Baldwin in there as well, and kind of give those shots down there, ball-controlled offense. And I will say this, like, they're going to have to win the time of possession because the defense has a ton of question marks. As we dive into this defense, you guys are going to find that there's some question marks out there with these guys. And in reality, it's going to rely on Blake taking care of the football, something that, 10 interceptions last year was not good. This year, if he can kind of rely on his rushing attack, make good throws, and make the right decisions, I think this offense could thrive. But if they're relied on too much, I think this is where this team can falter down the stretch.
Yeah, for sure. And just bringing it back to the offensive line, it's tough to look at how they performed last year and make a judgment on how they're going to be. But oftentimes that does come down to your collegiate coaches there. Last year, they were a good run blocking offensive line. So you hope that this group can kind of get that going as well, so they can kind of move the ball with Reese and Richardson. And then, pass protection, keeping Shapen clean is really important. I don't necessarily think he's one of these guys that can improvise as well as maybe some others in the Big 12. So I think keeping him clean, getting him some nice pockets, letting Jackson work downfield, I think that's going to be your key to being a good offense this year.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, let's go over the defense because the defense lost a lot of guys. So we're going to get into the key losses there. They brought some transfer guys in. They've really attacked that defense in the transfer portal and on the recruit side, the commitment side for the 23 class. What are they returning? Where do you have these guys? I know you talked about Jarrell Boykins before the show and some kind of highlight some guys, but overall, kind of a reloading year, right?
Certainly a reloading here. Not returning a whole lot, as you see on the screen, 45%-ish. Devin Lemire, as their free safety, is one of those players that I think is returning. And we talked about it on the North Carolina episode of this, but I think having a vocal leader on the back end of your secondary is super important, especially when you've got so many new faces in that group. Bryson Jackson returns. I think that, having a good star is super important. Anytime the teams are using a star, which for those that don't know, star is kind of your hybrid safety slot player that oftentimes plays around the line of scrimmage, can rush the passer, but also drops back in coverage. Bryson Jackson, he played okay last year, so I think he's going to come in and hopefully prove things. And then TJ Franklin is their X factor, I think. We'll talk about impact players, but TJ Franklin had a ton of pressures last year. He was a really well-graded defensive player. He didn't necessarily get the sack production, and you kind of hope that that's the next transition in his game. But overall, this defense, to me, they're juiced with potential. It's just new faces. We'll see how they gel. This is one unit, though, that they're consistently coached very, very well. So I do have faith that they will take a step forward on this side of the ball.
Yeah, and they got Matt Powers there now after being the co-defensive coordinator at Oregon. So he kind of came back there, and he came out and said, he talked about it in the spring, want to get up in people's faces, really challenge them at the line of scrimmage and press man coverage. And I think with the secondary, only get one guy returning. I think that's, Devin Lemire is the only guy returning in that secondary. So he's going to have a lot of faith in the transfers. Isaiah, we'll get into him. So there is definitely going to be that. And I'm glad you brought up that star position because for them, they've talked about that being a huge thing. They're really high on Bryson. And then also they have a kind of a converted corner, that AJ McCarty in there as well, maybe splitting time and doing those things. So like that star position for them is huge in this defense, in this defensive situation. When you're looking at what they lost, notable losses, obviously we have Lorando Johnson, Al Walcott, Devin Neal. So you're obviously losing all those corners. You see that Mark Milton and then Siaki Ika. Like when you're looking at him and what he's able to do, like he's a big boy. He got drafted by the Browns, and you're looking at that. Like he really led that defense on the front. So they took a big loss on their defensive front and their secondary. And those are two areas that in the Big 12 you don't want to really necessarily take losses in, especially in the secondary. But the running back rooms in the Big 12, now that they have their new teams that are going in there, you're going to see different offenses too, you kind of have to deal with. But also up front, like you're going to have to stop the run for some of these teams. And some of these teams coming in are definitely going to lean on that. Cincinnati, UCF, these guys, you're going to see that, and you're going to have to stop that run.
Yeah, and that's why I brought up Jarrell Boykins. So he's 6'3", 341. He did end up – so he played at junior college last year. And so he had to redshirt his first year. He was at Louisiana Tech, played at junior college. They seem to be pretty excited about him and stepping into that Ika role. But Ika is a big loss. I know he had kind of a down year last year. I think the film from 2021 was certainly better for him. But, I think that if you can get production around that nose tackle position too, I think you're in better shape. So if Gabe Hall, TJ Franklin, Garmin Randolph even can kind of step up and generate pressure, and you can have Jarrell Boykins kind of sitting there in the middle, I think they're in maybe better shape than last year because Ika kind of struggled against the run last year. I think, for as big as he was, he's a really good pass rusher. And I think that was all over his film, but sometimes he would get pushed around in the run game. So hopefully Jarrell Boykins can kind of step up and make that loss a little lighter for them.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, when you're looking at what they targeted, you could tell what they needed. They needed corners, and they went out and got them. LeVar Thornton is, position-wise, 39th ranked cornerback, but 4-star kid, out of Texas, so they definitely targeted that really well. Big kid, 6'2", 165, though, so in terms of, weight, definitely got to get that up a little bit, but a bigger corner, taller cornerback. Tayshawn Wilson as well, and you can tell they really targeted defensive line, corner position, and they went after the edge rusher as well, and Trent Thomas. So you could tell what they needed, and they went out and got it. But the question is are they ready to go? Like, I think they try to navigate that with their transfers as well, try to add win now pieces or pieces that can step in. So they have a younger defense. So one thing you're going to notice about this, you're going to have a lot of younger guys maybe having to step up and play in bigger roles.
Yeah, for sure. And with true freshmen, this will all kind of flesh out in camp as they head into this fall season. They're about to ramp up, I think. So I think one or more of these guys could certainly step up and push some of these veterans, but they're newer veterans for some playing time. And I think they've got the pieces there. Like you said, they targeted the secondary and the defensive line quite a bit. That's been a staple of what Dave Aranda's liked to do. So I'd like to see Thornton get on the field a little bit. I'm certainly questioning their corners a bit, but yeah, we'll see. I think this is a strong class because it might not always, 4 of these guys might hit, but if 4 of these guys hit, I think they did a really good job in recruiting.
Yeah, no, they did. And I think this is what we're talking about with the transfers. They really got to step up. So Johnny Carter is, from Utah State. I think Carter's fine. But, when you're thinking about going from the Mountain West to the Big 12 and those offenses, he's going to have to take a step up and play. Travion May coming over from Oregon. Byron Vaughn's coming from Utah State. Poor Utah State. You just got lost all your guys there. But again, looking at that, Mike Smith coming in. And I know just based on the reports, they are really banking on Isaiah Dunson, the former 4-star recruit going from Miami, to really be that dude. Like, they've talked about him really stepping up because they lost all of that in that secondary. They said they needed experience. They wanted Isaiah to really come, and he's got to act like that cornerback one. And I think out of anybody on this defense, he has a ton of pressure on himself, and because he's got to step up and be that leader in that room because of experience, him and Carter. But Dunson's got to be that dude. If Dunson struggles this year, this defense is going to struggle stopping the pass.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is they do see quite a few teams with some really nice wide receiver ones this year. So, I mean, it's put up or shut up for him, I think, this year. But I do think they're pretty pleased with what's been happening so far. Mike Smith's another guy I think has to come in and be an impact player right away because, their depth at the linebacker position is not really great right now. And I think Mike Smith is going to come start as their middle linebacker. And the middle linebacker in this defense is super important. So I think that those are the 2 guys that, they have to be impact players or this defense is probably in trouble.
Yeah, no, and let's talk about those impact players. So you see him there. Safety Devin Lemire, Isaiah Dunson's in there, Gabe Hall, TJ Franklin, who I know you're going to talk about. I'll talk about Gabe Hall. Going through it, they really expect Gabe Hall to kind of step up and be that guy on that defensive line to kind of solidify losing kind of that defensive line and where that talent's at. I know they mentioned plenty of times, hey, he's going to come in there. He's going to be our anchor. They really want him to be the anchor. And if he is that anchor, I think they could step up. I think Hall and Franklin are super important for that defensive line to take that next step. But Hall, to me, like everything that they talked about, he's going to, go inside, be that guy that's going to replace Siaki and just be that dude in the middle. So for me, Gabe Hall is my key kind of impact player. Is yours Franklin?
Yeah, I think too, like, the tandem of these 2 are super, super important for this defense. Between the 2 of them, they generated, I think, 61 pressures, only 6 sacks off of those 61 pressures, but pressures are often more translatable than sacks, even at the college level. So the fact that they got to the quarterback as often as they did within this defense, they were the top 2. Garmin Randolph actually was right up there tied with Gabe Hall. So you kind of hope that these guys can continue getting to the quarterback because that's really going to allow that secondary to some leeway, right? Like if there's pressure on the quarterback, the secondary has room for mistakes. I think they kind of need that this year, unless Isaiah Dunson steps up and he's like a top 20 pick, but I don't think that's going to happen. So, I mean, TJ Franklin and Gabe Hall and Garmin Randolph to me are the keys to this defense.
All right, let's jump into their schedule. Let's take a look here. 2023 schedule. The big thing that stands out to me, just going over the schedule when I was doing this, is they have 8 home games. So if they're gonna be successful, they to kind of mirror that youth that they have out there to maybe limit that and have that ability to play at home. That's going to be helpful for them. So they do have those games. Their over unders at 7.5, right? So they're sitting there at 7.5. Texas State should be a gimme, and then they got Utah, and that's going to be a massive game for that program. That's going to be a fun game for Utah versus Baylor. I think that's going to be fun at home, though. Then I don't know who the hell is making the schedule out there. I was joking with Christian. I was doing this. Long Island University. All I saw was LIU, and I was like, "What the hell is LIU?" I know football really well. Like I know college football. I've been watching it a long time, so I had to Google it. Hell of a logo. I love that logo. But yeah, Long Island really going out on your limb there, Baylor. But so you should. Worst case worst, they're 2-1. Then going to that Texas game, though. I mean, they have a rough stretch there. Utah, Texas, UCF is not going to be a walk in the park. They have a great running back room, and their quarterback, he's going to be a lot of fun jumping over there and doing the things that he does. Texas Tech, Cincinnati, Iowa State, and then finishing against like Houston, Kansas State, TCU, West Virginia. Not like a overly hard schedule, especially playing at home. I think they're borderline at 8 to 7 wins, somewhere in there. Where are you leaning?
I counted it up. I think I'm landing at 6. So I think I hit the under here. I think they lose Utah. I think they lose Texas. I think they lose Texas Tech. Texas Tech is one of those sneaky teams that I think could finish in the top 10 by the end of the year. Cincinnati's got a good program, and I think Houston is going to be better off this year. And then TCU should handle business as well. So that's just a lot of games. Kansas State, I think Iowa State, even if they take a step forward, there are a lot of toss-up games. And for that, I think I lean on, I do think this is a very well-coached team. I think, from an overachieving perspective 2 years ago, I think some people were surprised with how well they played. But I think I'd lean on last year's output being more similar to what we're going to see this year. This seems like one of those years that it's like we're teetering on the edge of success here. Next year might be our year, though. So I think that this could definitely be a growth year. And hopefully some of those recruits land and 2024 is their year. But I would hit the under for Baylor this year.
I think they're going to be more competitive. I have them at 7, and the reason why is they're going to go 2-2 in those first probably 4 games, and then they got to win. When you're looking at, at next 8, they got to get into that 6-2 range in the next 8 games to kind of hit their over on 7.5. I'd be worried about that. I don't know if they're going to be able to hit that. I think that when you're looking at depth and those type of things, I put them at 7 wins-ish, put them in there. And then I still think UCF is going to be tricky for guys. Like, I think that there's some teams in here when you haven't played these guys either, when you haven't seen them before, there is something to that. And I do think that that's something to know. Now, Aranda's a great coach, and I think he's going to have them well coached and ready to go. So there's definitely where they could overachieve like Baylor usually does. And we're sitting here talking next year, and Baylor fans are yelling at us. And that's completely understandable there. So that's the outlook there. I will say one thing. They are bringing in the number 3 ranked punting prospect, Palmer Williams. They love this kid. So I got to give my punters a little bit of a shout out there. Anything else on these Baylors before we get out of here?
No, I mean, I think, like I said, 2023 might be that building year, especially with all that turnover on both sides of the ball. But I'm hoping that this is an exciting team to watch. I think, they have the recipe to be that. Their defense is always really fun to watch. Their offense with that group of running backs, I think we're looking at a fun team. Maybe that doesn't result in wins.
Not necessarily. All right. We'll appreciate you guys. We'll be back. We're going to go to the next team next week. So follow along, hit that like and subscribe button. We will check you guys on our next video.